So here we have a new piece of paper. We're going to draw this cone smaller than all of our other forms because the pointillism and the stippling technique takes so long that I think we should make the form smaller. So we're going to go about, let's go about 2 inches down from the top of the paper and draw a horizon line. Okay, so this is going to be our cone. And the art ones will do stippling. Okay, the art twos will do pointillism. And that's going to be done in different shades of colored pencil. Okay, so when you draw the cone, it is a little difficult in that you have to draw an oval once again, just like the cylinder, and you have to draw it toward the bottom of your paper, just so that we have a little bit of space for our shadow. Okay, everything is a little crooked. There we go. Just so that we have a little bit of space for our shadow, I want you to draw your oval, let's say about, let's start up here, like about 3 inches up from the bottom of the paper. That's right about here, okay? And you could have that kind of be the center of the oval. And I want you to swing your arms around and very lightly trace the shape of an oval with your pencil tip. And just keep going for about a few seconds until you get a couple lines that you find promising, okay? And then go back in and kind of darken up the lines that you like. Okay. Erase any of the little stray marks that you don't want. Let's take a look at that oval. Okay. So I want this bottom edge to be kind of round as the top. I don't want any like flat edges. I don't want the bottom to look, you know, flat like a deflated cake. I just want both sides to be rounded, like this is kind of like an almond or rice shape. Once again, somewhere in the middle of this space here, I'm drawing a line to show how I'm offsetting the midpoint. I don't want you to put the midpoint right here in the middle of the line. I want you to set it a tiny bit further back, okay? And why am I putting it a little further back? Because we're looking at this circle when it's laying on a floor or a table, and we're looking at it from an angle. So we're not looking at it from above and looking down on a full circle. We're looking at it from kind of in front and a little bit above. That's our angle. We're looking down on it, but we're in front of this cone. So that's why this space right here in front is bigger than this space back here, because we see that edge, it's closer to us, so everything, you know, that is closer to us is bigger, including this space. We're going to draw a line straight up from that midpoint, and that line has to be straight, so it's got to be parallel to the edge of your paper. Do the best you can with that, and let's make it let's make it 3 inches tall. Okay, if your line, oops, that's kind of off center. If your line touches the horizon line, make it go a little taller. I don't want it to touch the horizon line because I just feel like that's weird that it perfectly lines up with that, and it might create like a weird optical effect. So I want you to be either below it or above it, but not on the horizon line. Okay. After you do that, I want you to draw 2 points on either side of your oval. 2 points, like that. Draw a line from the side of your oval up to that point at the top of that vertical line. Do that to both sides and you should get a cone. All right, after you do that, erase the line in the middle, that line that came up from the midpoint of the circle, and we want to erase this back curve right here, because we're not going to be drawing a clear cone, we're drawing a solid color cone. Okay, lighten up the little dot at the top and just leave the point there. Lighten up these little dots on the side. Actually, you can leave the dots on the side for now because we have to draw the shadow, but we have to pick which side the direction of the light source is coming from. So should we do right side, ladies, or left? Right? Okay. So we're going to put the light source on the right. Okay. Whatever that light source may be. And we are going to drop a shadow going to the lower left. But the lines for the shadow has to come closer together or look like they're on a trajectory to start to come to a point, either on the paper or off the paper somewhere. And that would still be accurate. You don't need a vanishing point line to draw this. So I'm going to start from not the point here, but like the edge of this curve right here, because I don't want the line to come out like that. That would be weird. For the shadow to just come out from underneath the cone like that, it should come out from the edge of the cone. So don't do that thing that I just did previously. And I'm just going to point it toward like the lower left hand side. Over here, I'm going to point it toward kind of downward, just to show that that is the shadow of the cone. The shadow of a cone is a triangular shape, so it's gotta be that triangular shape. This is a small cone, so if you kept the lines pretty wide, that would imply the shadow's really, really long. And after a certain point, it starts to look too long to be the shadow of the object. So I think that this is good. What I don't like is when I draw a line like that, which shares the same angle as the line for the cone. I find that sometimes makes the shadow look weird. So there's nothing wrong with it. We could swing it this way and it would still be fine. It would still be fine. You could really have an exaggerated shadow if you kind of kick that angle to the left. Like this. Let's try this. I tried a couple different shadows here. Ooh, that's really dramatic. So try a couple things. Okay, so we have the cone and its shadow. Like that line was a little too far in. Okay, the sun is very low on the sky, so having an elongated shadow is fine. It's almost touching the edge of the paper. That bothers me a tiny bit, but but it's okay. We're just going to leave it. So we're going to use pointillism. So when you use pointillism, you're just going to use dots. So you could do that with your pencil. And if you're Art 1, make sure that you sharpen your pencils and sharpen them frequently. The shadow's darkest area is called the what? Yes, excellent. Both of you, you're correct. It is called the umbra. So even the shadow has variations in tone. So right now, I am rotating the tip of my pencil to create these little dots. Another option would be to use a marker, a fine tip marker, something like this. That is a tiny little tip there, and it will take you a long time, but it will still look very nice if you use a fine tip. This one is called Pilot Razor Point, and this gives you, it's an ink marker, but it's got the tiniest, thinnest line, and it's just a writing ink pen. You could use this, but the bad thing about doing it in marker is if you get a little too dark, you can't fix that. You're going to have to use whiteout to cover up any mistakes. If it's too light, you could always add more dots, so that's not a problem. But if you go too dark and you're shading with a marker, you can't erase. That is the one bad thing about that. But stippling, which this technique is called stippling, is used by people who use ink often. And it gives them a very smooth looking, way of shading. There's a slight texture because of the dots, but it still looks pretty smooth. You can shade someone's face. You could shade inanimate objects using this shading technique. Because you can't do the scribble thing. You can do it, but it looks messy and it gives you a little bit too much texture. So pen and ink artists, whenever they want to show that something is a smooth surface, they use stippling, which is this technique right here. I'm using a 9B pencil, which is my darkest pencil, to draw in my little dots for the umbra. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm shading with little dots that are super close together. I'm pressing pretty hard down on my pencil. I'm going to go and label this in case some of you want to get a jump on this. If the sun is here, I'm going to look at the left half. The left half of this cone is going to be kind of the dark half. So I'm going to say a little bit past the midpoint. I'm going to draw a slightly, you could draw it as a straight line or a wavy line, but I'm just drawing a little slightly wavy line because I know I'm going to use those dots. They're going to give me that little bump on the sides. This is called your core shadow in here. Okay. Next to your core shadow, you're going to have your dark mid-tone, and then on the very edge you're going to have reflected light. It's a light area inside of your darker shaded side, so that's reflected light right in here, right along the edge, just like the cylinder here. This is the darker side. We have dark, I put a dark mid-tone in color, a darker mid-tone in color, a slightly lighter dark mid-tone, and I put the little reflected light on the shady side of my cylinder. It's the same thing here. On the other side, we have a lot of room. A light mid-tone next to my core shadow. Then I'm going to break it down into a lighter mid-tone, just one extra step on this side since we have the room. And then we're going to have a little sliver of highlight, and then we're just going to have a light value. I'm just saying it's just a little bit of gray with some very fine dots that is a little bit darker than the highlight, just so that we can see the edge of the cone. Because our background is white, it's not colored in. If I left that all just the highlight right on the edge, then it would just kind of become a part of the background and we would lose that part of the cone. We wouldn't be able to see it properly. So we have our light source on the left side. That's very different. Most people say we want it on the right, so we're here with period 7. We're here to break rules. We're do something different. So let's put the core shadow right over here. That's the third stripe over from the right side. That's the dark half right here. The dark side is our right side. And I'm going in with a 6B, and I'm going to put my dots really close together. If you see my pencil, I'm actually drawing a dot. I'm not just going like this, because that doesn't really do anything. That will give you a very light dot. You have to press hard, and you have to rotate the tip of your pencil to get a little dot. So let's do that. If you're using a marker, do not press hard or you will ruin your marker. With the marker, you just lightly put your marker tip there, and then the ink will flow onto the paper. And most people, when they're using markers, they use way too much pressure, which ruins the tip of the marker pretty quickly. We usually do that when we're younger. But you don't want to do that, especially when markers can be expensive. If anyone has ever bought, I think it's called Copic markers, those things can be $10 per color, I think. And students who like to do anime drawing, they love to use those Copic markers. There's a lot of copies of them now because they are so expensive. They are a type of design marker. So originally an illustrator or graphic designer would use a type of marker like that. Before that, there were Prismacolor design markers. I have a couple of those, and they were alcohol based, so they would dry very, very quickly on the paper, which was a good thing. And they did not buckle the paper because the water in the alcohol based marker there was very little water. It was mostly alcohol, so it would just dry right up. I'm using a 6B because my shadow is a 9B, so I went a couple steps down. That's a 6B. And I'm going to do my core shadow. You can't see the number here very well, but that's a 9B. So I'm doing a 6B right now for this core shadow. 9B for the cast shadow and the umbra. So what are the 3 parts of a cast shadow? What's the darkest part, ladies? It's just called the umbra. So how about the middle part? The mid-tone in a shadow. The penumbra. Excellent. This is very this should be a very relaxing activity. No one should be doing this full of stress. It should not be stressful to anybody. This is should feel like when you're sitting in math class and you're doodling something along the corner of your page. It's that kind of a relaxing activity. Although you should be paying attention to your math, but sometimes they say that actually gets your mind a little bit more active and alert to be doing something at the same time, like doodling. So the tough part of doing this is to keep your dots kind of consistent. Also, the spacing has to be consistent. You can't have your dots closer together in the same section, have them clustered in a spot, or that part will appear darker than the rest of the areas in your core shadow. I seem to be making my dots a little bit smaller up here, and it's almost like I'm trying to fit it into this tiny little space, and that's fine. So that's my core shadow. And I could probably stand to make it a little wider up here and take a little bit more room. So let's do the next one. This was a 6B, so I'm going to switch to a 4B, sharpen my 4B pencil up. And I'm going to create a slightly lighter, dark mid-tone. That's right here on the right side of where I was just doing my little dots. Okay, now I have to make sure that I don't crowd my dots together as much as I did here. But I have to also make sure that I don't have areas where the dots are clustered closer together, so that I have darker patches and lighter patches within the same, the same value area. So you have to keep your spacing consistent. I think that's the hardest part, is just keeping your spacing consistent so that it all looks like one value. Okay? Okay, Kylie, I see. But I hope you're back now. But that's okay. I mean, if you lose connection, try to get right back on. And probably the weather doesn't help. So that's a huge jump, really. I know that my dots can be closer than that, but what I'm going to do is finish putting in some dots. And since this is a really small triangle, I'm going to try to sharpen as much as possible. Okay, and go in there. Okay. So that, I think I can kind of fix that shape. Maybe make this look a little smoother. Okay. Now I'm going to go back and try to put some dots in between all the dots that I previously drew. Kind of fill in the gap a little tighter. So I put in my first layer of dots. Now I'm kind of going in and going in between the spaces and just trying to keep it nice and consistent so it looks the same value throughout the whole triangle. There seems to be this kind of like white line showing up, so I need to go in and change that. So I could go back and fix the shape a little bit of each of my little triangles and also put in some dots near that little white line. There shouldn't be little white lines separating the different values. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my 6B and fill in any little white spaces more with dots, just so that this first value is definitely darker and doesn't have as much white little gaps in between. Okay, so it just needs a couple little dots and that should be fixed. Just touch it up, go back and touch up spots. Okay, so now, yeah, definitely this is darker. When I went back in there with the 6B, I'm pressing pretty hard too with my 6B pencil in my previous area, just to get it to look darker and different from the area I just did. All right, now for the reflected light area, I was using a 4B, a 6B here, a 4B here, so maybe find a 2B. So here's a 2B, or so it says. So I'm going to make my dots spaced out even further right here, but not too far apart because I still have to do these 3 areas. Okay, you can always go and put another layer of dots in those empty spaces between dots, but for now I'm just gonna, I know that this is gonna be too light, but I just want to put down a first layer. Okay. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to go in and put some more dots in between because we don't want to get too light too quickly. And if something's this light, it really belongs on the opposite side of the cone where the light source is hitting more. So I'm just making this a little darker now. Should you see little distinct areas? Should you see the stripes like this? You could. It depends on how sharp your pencil is. I feel like you get the more distinct stripes with the pen and ink though. So if you don't see this is dark, this is medium, this is light, kind of like a sharp difference between the values, it's okay. You don't have to like see a crisp edge where one changes to the other value. You don't have to. Sometimes it's a little softer when you do it in pencil, and that's fine. As long as it's overall getting lighter. So is it overall getting a little bit lighter? I'm looking at this and I feel like with this medium area in between here and here, it's looking a little too similar. I feel like I need to put some more dots in there with my 4B pencil. So as I did with this, I'm going back in with my 4B pencil and filling in some of these little white gaps. Okay, so I have a dark, I have a medium, and I have a light. And the next place to shade is my light middle tones. So my light middle tones, I'm going to go and jump to from a 9B and a 6B, which I used here. I'm going to jump to a 4B, and I'm going back to the 4B, but I am going to use lighter pressure, because with the pencil you can control the pressure. That's also a factor that you can change. And I'm going to space my dots further apart, and then I will draw in more dots if I feel like that's just too light. But let's just see kind of how they look together, because you need to put it down to see. I know that's going to be too dark. I'm going to have to put some more dots in it, but not go too crazy. This highlight, which is next, can have the least amount of dots. And then all we have to do is this little tiny strip right here of the light value. So now you see that it's moving pretty close, like pretty quickly. And then after shading the cone, you're going to move to shading the shadow of the cone, and that will go, it'll get a little bit slow because you're doing the darker values right here, but as you do the lighter and lighter, it'll start speeding up again. So I definitely am lighter here than over here. So I did accomplish what I wanted to do, which is called a light middle tone. It should definitely be lighter than the dark middle tone or mid-tone. Now let's go really light, and I'm going to pick a B pencil, which is just the beginning of the soft pencils. So if you just see a B, that stands for 1B. And I'm going to really space out my dots. So I'm putting a couple more dots in between, and the harder pencil definitely is keeping it light too. Now we're going to do the light value, and I'm going to stick with the B, and I'm going to press harder, and I'm also going to make my dots a little bit closer together than in my highlight, just so it looks a little stronger, a little bit darker to finish up the cone. And all you have to do is just add a couple more dots in between your spaces, and that should get you there. I was watching my training, but I was also trying to work on this. And this is stippling using the little ink pen that I have. And it took a long time, but you know, a long time is like what? It's like 2.5 hours of concentrated effort. So right here I wanted the 3 different areas of my shadow. And this is taking the little ink pen and just, you know, this little guy right here, he's a writing pen, a Pilot razor point, and just going boop, 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 like that. And so the core shadow is right over here. That's my core shadow. And then this was actually, the whole thing was my core shadow here, this one and this one. And I had to make a darker area because I didn't have enough room for my my dark midtone. So I had to make this my dark midtone and make my core shadow a little bit darker. But I try to lighten it up a little bit on the bottom. I know, I had to adjust it just so that it did not look the same as the value down here where my cast shadow started. So this is a dark medium, and this is a little reflected light. And reflected light still has a lot of shading in it, but it just seems to be kind of like a light area on the darker side. And it needs to be here to show the actual edge of the cone. Okay, then over here we get into the medium, light middle tones. Then we have a lighter middle tone. So I broke that up into 2 middle tone areas. On the lighter side we have your highlight, and you'll notice that my highlight is really not white. It's actually a light shade of gray. So if you ladies, I noticed a couple of things popping up. If you did come in a little bit later, please put it in the chat that you're here, and I'll take a look at that and adjust my attendance. Okay? All right. So, and then on the right side, I did put in a little bit lighter, a light gray. I just call it a light gray. It's definitely lighter here than this left side here where I put the reflected light. I just wanted to make it a little bit lighter than that side since this is supposed to be the light side. And I put a little darker value here so that I can hide my pencil line for the side of my cone, and also so you can see the side of my cone. Since my background is not done and it's going to be left white, I didn't want this to look too white or it would kind of blend into the background and my cone would disappear. So that is the finished example of stippling. You don't have to do it in the ink pen. You could certainly do it in pencil. Can you use bigger dots? Yes, but don't make humongous chunky dots. Do keep them fairly small, but you can use smaller dots than the dots made by this ink pen, certainly. But the smaller the dot, I don't know why this is. The smaller the dot, basically the more smoother the shading looks. So you can see how that makes it look much smoother. All right, I'm done.